Hey besties, it's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing a quarterly reading wrap up. It's something that I like to do every 3 months, just talk about all the books I read recently. So I'm going to be talking about these books in order from my 5-star ratings all the way down to my 1-star rating. But here's where the twist comes in. You guys are going to be able to watch Subway Surfer on the screen while I'm talking about them. And if you've never heard of Subway Surfer or you don't really understand what I'm referring to, there's this trend on TikTok where people will read Reddit story times, and on screen you'll either see someone playing Minecraft or playing Subway Surfer on their phone. And for a lot of people it really helps with their listening comprehension and their ability to pay attention. If you're still a little bit confused by this concept, I will play this one joke TikTok that actually gave me the idea to do this with my video, and then I feel like after you see that meme you'll understand where I'm going with this.
It's just really cool how we click together, and I always feel like I'm really excited whenever I see you.
Getting into my 5-star reads, the first book that I want to talk about is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This is a book that I read for the reading vlog where I couldn't stop reading until I got 5 stars. This is a cozy fantasy that takes place in a Victorian setting, and I absolutely loved it so much. It's about our main character, Emily Wilde, who is a scientist specifically focusing on fairies. She's in the midst of writing an encyclopedia, and she's taking her research to this northern snowy village. She unfortunately offends everyone in the town with her lack of people skills. She doesn't really understand their customs, and so she just, does a few faux pas, and so nobody really wants to talk to her, which is unfortunate because she really needs to speak to the villagers for her research. But lo and behold, Emily's academic rival, Wendell Bamblebee, shows up on the scene, and he quickly charms all the people in the village, much to Emily's dismay. Wendell is someone that she slightly considers a friend, but also a foe because he has stolen some of her research in the past. This book worked for me on so many levels. Obviously, I gave it 5 stars. It was my perfect type of cozy fantasy. I feel like every time I've brought this up, someone in my comments wants to use it as an opportunity to give me an essay about why they don't like this book. I'm so sorry if you did not enjoy it as much as me, but I obviously gave it 5 stars and I really liked it. I loved the banter between Emily and Wendell. I also loved the way that the Fae were portrayed in this. Heather Fawcett definitely took on a more accurate representation of Fae. A lot of them are kind of erring on the side of evil in this. They don't really care about humans. I feel like Sarah J. Maas is very responsible for everyone romanticizing fairy dick, but in this book the fairies are not people you want to fuck around with, and I just love this book so much. 5 stars. I really like this. I think that if you like Fae, if you like rivals to lovers, if you like an academic setting, I think you should pick this up. The next book that I gave 5 stars is another controversial one, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I unfortunately was late to the party, so I don't have the one with the dragons on it. This was actually back ordered. I had to pre-order this. It literally took a month to get to me, but I am very happy to have a copy of it, even though I personally think that this cover is very ugly. This cover alone is something that put me off from wanting to read it when it first started getting hyped up, but luckily I did read it for that video where I was reading popular books, and I'm so glad that I did because I was very pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this. If you haven't seen the hype around this is a book about a school where people train to become dragon riders. Our main character Violet, her whole life was training to be a scribe. She was going to be a library girl. She was not looking to be someone who fought in an army, but her mother is a general and she forces her to go into this dragon riding school. And the thing about this dragon riding school is that you don't automatically become someone who gets to ride dragons. The dragon actually has to choose you, and it's very dangerous to go into this school, so a lot of people die in their first year. There has to be crack cocaine in this, maybe even meth, because I was addicted. I could not put this book down. I literally read it in maybe a day and a half, and it is super long. It's like a long fantasy, and I just loved it. I loved everything about it. I was live, laugh, loving the entire time I was reading this. This is the kind of book that will make you feel nostalgic even though you've never read it before. It reminded me a lot of Divergent, and so if you want to revisit the way that your brain chemistry was when you were reading The Hunger Games or Divergent or watching The 100 on the CW, any of that kind of like teeny boppier energy but like make it adult, this is perfect for you. There is spice in this, there is dragons, there's just so much intrigue in it. Violet, the main character, was not my favorite character, honestly. She was a little bit annoying sometimes. Her whole thing was that she was just like so tiny that she like couldn't really ride the dragons, and so like that was a big thing that kept happening that was kind of annoying and a little bit cliche, but I got over it after a while and I did grow to like Violet more and more. The real character who is the love of my life is Xaden. He is a zaddy. We love Xaden. He is sexy. He has shadow magic. We love everything about him. The one thing I'll say to anyone who's picking this up is to go in with low expectations, because this book is either going to work for you or it's not. You're either going to love the writing, hate the writing, like the world building, hate the world building. I don't really feel like I've seen a lot of people on the fence or in between. Like, this is either going to be the book or it's not going to be your book. Also, don't get it twisted. I'm not saying any of this so you can be like, oh, Sarah liked it even though she thinks thinks it's bad. No, I don't think this book is bad. I genuinely liked this book and thought that it was well written and I liked the plot. I just want to throw that out there because I feel like a lot of people are seeing the hype and then they're getting disappointed when they read it and they don't like it. I don't know. I'm actually usually picky, but there's something about this, like I said, actual meth in it. Like, I was addicted. I was addicted, could not put it down, and I cannot wait for the sequel. I'm so glad that it's coming out this year. And then the last book that I gave 5 stars, I did only give 3 books 5 stars within the last 3 months, which is unfortunate, but the last book that I absolutely loved, just was absolutely magnificent, amazing book, was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I don't have my physical copy because I lent it to my friend Katie. I just needed her to read it, so I like shoved it into her hands the last time we went to dinner, and I was like, you will read this. She did finish it, and she also gave it 5 stars, so I need to get my copy back from her. I read this book for my vlog where I was giving authors I hate a second chance. Abby Jimenez unfortunately did write my least favorite book that I read last year. It was truly abysmal, did not have a good time, and so I had been told by many subscribers, people in my comments, that if I liked Emily Henry books that I would definitely like Part of Your World, and so I was a little bit hesitant to pick it up, but because of this video concept I did indeed find one of the best romances of all time. This book is about 2 main characters, Alexis and Daniel. Alexis is a doctor and she comes from a very wealthy family that has a very long history of working at this one hospital in Minneapolis. And one day she is far out of town driving home and her car breaks down, and a guy named Daniel comes and is able to pull her out of the ditch because he has a tow on her truck, and they end up having a one-night stand, and then after that they start a long distance situationship. Daniel lives a few hours away from Alexis in a really small town, and he is both the mayor of the town and also the owner of a bed and breakfast. And so he and Alexis just start this darling relationship that is so adorable. I loved the communication between these 2 characters. I think Daniel might be my favorite male love interest I've ever read in a romance book in my life, and you're in luck because this book is dual POV, so you get to hear how much Daniel is simping for Alexis. If you're looking for a book where the guy fell first, you absolutely need to pick this up. Daniel is literally obsessed with Alexis. They also have an age gap. Alexis is 38 and he's 28. It genuinely made me laugh out loud multiple times. I loved the banter. I loved the conversations that all the characters were having. I also really enjoyed the side characters. Like, everything about this was flawless. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. I was live laugh laughing the entire time that I was reading it. Also, if you like baby goats, you should read this because there is the cutest baby goat. There's also a pig named Kevin Bacon. Everything about this book was just so funny and cute and sweet. Moving on into my 4-star reads, the first book I want to talk about is Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. This is a novella about a woman who is in mourning because her son died in a car accident a few years ago. She often goes to the site of his car crash and she mourns him. She kind of treats it as his grave, and one day she bleeds on the ground sort of where his accident happened, and she starts hearing whispers, and she starts to see that her son can come back to her if she starts sacrificing things. But it was a really good book if you enjoy horror that explores grief. I've discovered that about myself recently because I also really liked Our Wives Under the Sea. Horror that has something to do with grief is just, I don't know, there's something about it that really gets to me. I also felt like the entity that's in this book was pretty spooky, and I just enjoyed it overall. I really liked the writing, and I definitely think that I would read more from Laura Hightower in the future. The next 4-star read I had was Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Piranesi is a weird book to explain, and Elias gets mad at me if I tell anyone the plot because he is a big believer. He would swear on his life that you should not know anything about this book going into it, but I personally feel like you could benefit from just like a tiny little synopsis, so I'm going to give you like 1 sentence of what I would say this book is about. So my short and sweet synopsis of this is that it's about a character named Piranesi who lives in these magical halls. Every day he goes around these halls looking at all the different statues that are there and writing down notes and looking at wildlife, and ocean waves rise up in these halls, and it's very magical and kind of just like, I don't even know, like you can't really even say what's going on. There's not really a magic system. It's just kind of like the magic is there. I feel like this book is very mystical, magical, whimsical, all those kind of feelings. Like, I wouldn't necessarily call it a cozy fantasy, but I will say if you enjoy Erin Morgenstern, I feel like you will like this book. I'm not a big fan of Erin Morgenstern's books, but what I liked about Piranesi is that it was a little bit more tangible than her books, and so it was like everything I wanted an Erin Morgenstern book to be that ended up being just like a little too whimsical. And so I feel like this one rode the line between having a good plot but also a lot of whimsy. So yeah, that's my brief kind of synopsis, summary, review of this. I don't really want to say too much more because Elias will come to my house and fight me because he always says that no one should know anything about this book going in, but it's very fantastical, and it just kind of gave me a warm feeling while I was reading it, and it was kind of sad at the same time, and I loved it. I loved it, and I really want to reread it. The next book is Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to Dragons. I may have butchered that title. I don't fully remember the order of the words, but I know that there's a guide and there's dragons in the title. I can't remember exactly what year this takes place, but I believe it might be a Victorian Regency setting. I can't fully remember, but Miss Percy is a spinster and she lives with her sister and her nieces and nephews, and so she is now in her 40s and her life has just been kind of there. She hasn't really had a lot of excitement. She never got married, and so she's just kind of living. And one day her great distant uncle, somehow twice removed guy, dies, and he leaves her this dragon egg, and it hatches, and so now she suddenly has a dragon. And so it's all about her trying to figure out how to take care of this dragon, and slowly but surely there are adventures that she ends up going on, and there's a little bit of romance for her. And it was very sweet because I genuinely really love reading characters that are a little bit older. I feel like too often we're reading books about teenagers or people in their 20s, and it's not often that we're reading someone in their 40s. She honestly even might be in her 50s. I feel like she is pretty old, like maybe even her early 50s. I can't fully remember. This book felt like a warm hug. It was really sweet. I really enjoyed it. I will say it wasn't my favorite cozy fantasy I've ever read. I did only give it 4 stars, and I haven't found it to be particularly memorable. Like, I haven't really thought about it a lot since I read it, but there is a sequel that I might pick up. But if you like dragons and you like cuteness and you want to read about a character that's a little bit older, just finding a second chance in life, then I definitely think that you should pick this up. It was really sweet. I feel like sweet is the perfect word for it. Up next, we have The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. It had been quite a few years since I read a Tessa Dare book, and I was randomly between vlogs and I was just looking for something to read, and this was available at my library on audio, and I was like, let's give Miss Dare a second try. Not to say that I disliked any of her books before, but I had only read like 2 and I was like whatever about them, and so I picked this up and it was so sweet. I loved it so much. It was this close to being a 5-star read. There was something about it towards the end that made me not want to give it 5 stars, but overall it was a very pleasant and happy and cozy romance to read. So in this book we have a duke, and he is not in a great spot mentally or emotionally because he recently was at war and half of his body ended up getting burned from, I think, a bomb. I don't know, did they have bombs back then? Something happened. He was like in a fire of some sort, and so now half of his body is burned, and so he was engaged to this lady that ended up breaking off the engagement once she saw what he looked like. On his doorstep one day, our main female character shows up in a wedding dress because she was the wedding dressmaker for the woman who called off the wedding, and she did not get paid for this dress, but she needs to pay her rent. So she shows up on this duke's doorstep and she's like, bitch, give me my money. Like, she was quoting Rihanna, like, bitch better have my money. He is just sitting there thinking, I need a wife. And so once he sees her in the wedding dress, it kind of gives him an idea. He is looking for someone who's a little bit desperate, who needs money, and so he's like, listen, I'm a duke, wanna marry me? And so they end up having this marriage of convenience. She is lowborn, but she quickly becomes a duchess, and that's why it's called The Duchess Deal. The banter between the two main characters was hilarious. I also loved the journey of the duke coming to accept his scars as the main character was accepting him. There's also a hilarious cat character that I absolutely loved. I love when there's animals in books, and the animal in this was just so cute and funny. And so this was just such a delightful little read. I read it in like one day, and it was just a breath of fresh air. It was so fun. If you're looking for something light and fun and you like Regency romance, you definitely should pick this up. And the last book that I gave 4 stars is Big Swiss by Jen Began. It is, I believe, literary fiction, and it's about this woman named Greta who is a transcriptionist. Every time I talk about this book, I feel like I want to say a word that is not accurate. Anyway, she transcribes therapy sessions for a sex therapist. There is one patient who is a woman from Switzerland that Greta very quickly becomes obsessed with. There's just something about this woman that she's very infatuated with, and so she starts calling her Big Swiss. And then one day at the dog park, she ends up hearing the woman's voice, and she's like, oh my god, that's Big Swiss. And she starts this relationship with her, but doesn't tell her who she is, and she hides her identity. And so it just becomes like this long web of her starting this really emotional relationship with this woman, but also lying about who she is and what her name is, and it's just like hijinks ensue. I feel like Greta is a woman that is definitely conducting some hijinks. I feel like this book perfectly balances the line between being very quirky and odd and also having a lot of heart and different things to think about. I loved Greta so much as a main character. She is very unhinged. She is lying for most of this book about who she is as a person, but there was something about her that I liked. She is the perfect kind of messy main character. If you enjoy someone who just does not have their life together, that is Greta. And she also has a dog named Pignon that I absolutely loved. Pignon was like my favorite character. Like I said, I love a book with a pet. like a dog or cat, something like that. I love an animal in a book. Everyone in this book is fairly quirky, but I just felt like it really worked. I really enjoyed it. And by the end of it, I just felt like warm. I felt good. I really want to buy a copy of this because I liked it so much. I could see myself rereading it, and so I definitely want to put it on my bookshelf. And the ending was a little bit open-ended. If you don't like that, you might not like that about this book, but it didn't really resolve all the issues. But I felt like the last scene just made me smile, and it made me feel warm, weirdly, even though I did want more answers, but whatever. HBO has actually optioned this as a TV show that is supposed to be coming out in the next year or two. I don't know what's going on with the writer's strike, but I am really excited to see an adaptation of this because I feel like it would make the perfect miniseries. And I don't know, it just has like sapphic love in it, and it's kind of an unhinged, messy ride, and I love that. Moving on into the 3-star category, we have quite a few books that just were not working for me. It's really disappointing. A lot of these I really desperately wanted them to be 5 stars, but just something about them made me be like, I can't. And so they're all kind of sitting in that like 3-star range. If Goodreads allowed me to do half stars, I probably might give a few of them 3.5 stars, but overall this is just a bunch of books that really made me sad because I wanted to like them so much more. The first book that I want to talk about in the 3-star category is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This book really let me down because Taylor Adams wrote one of my favorite thrillers of all time, No Exit, and I wanted this to feel just like No Exit, but unfortunately for me it did not. A lot of people who've read this have said that they thought it was wild, they love all the twists, and they had a really great time. Unfortunately, that is not how it worked out for me. I didn't really like the style. This book is about our main character who is house sitting at a beach house. She is staying there alone with her dog, and one day she reads this horror book that she really hates. She thinks it's misogynistic, she thinks it's unrealistic, just everything about it she is not enjoying, and so she decides to leave a 1-star review. Unfortunately, the author sees this review and he is very unhappy about it, and so he demands that she takes it down. They email back and forth and she refuses to let it go, and he ends up hunting her down and is stalking her and trying to break into the house. And so it's sort of like a cat and mouse chase where he's trying to get her, and that's kind of where all the drama and spookiness ensues in this. Where I didn't like the book is that we at one point switched over from only having one POV of the main girl to also having a perspective of supposedly the guy that is hunting her down. And so I didn't love the addition of this other narrator. I feel like it really took away from the thrill because the way that this narration is told is kind of from the perspective of the future, like someone's writing a book about what happened to her on this night. And so it just kind of took me out of the moment. I also thought this book was so unserious because the author is described as smelling like Mountain Dew and being a bit of an incel. Like at one point he literally has a fedora, and so I just wasn't really enjoying that aspect. I feel like, again, unserious is like the best word to describe it. It took me out of the moment, and while I would admit that this book kind of goes off the rails towards the end of it and the hunt just gets like really crazy and wild, I didn't like it the way that I like No Exit. Like No Exit also was a little bit unserious and crazy and all over the place, but it worked for me a lot better. There was just something about this. I didn't like it. I didn't like that narration. Something I've been discovering about myself is that if I'm reading a thriller or a horror book, I don't really want a POV from the bad side. Like I only want a POV from the people who are in danger, because I feel like once I start hearing from the bad guy, then all of a sudden I'm not feeling, you know, the rush or the feeling like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? And so, I don't know. The next book that I have, I did expect to not be great because a lot of people didn't enjoy it, but as I was reading it, I thought I was gonna give it 5 stars, but the ending absolutely ruined it for me, and that is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. This is the sequel to the first Crescent City book. For this much of the book, I thought I was going to be giving it 5 stars. And then we got to this tail end, like the last quarter, the last 15% or something, and everything just fell apart for me. And I was really disappointed with the direction that this took. Let me rewind. I'm trying to think of like how to describe this. We have our main character, Bryce, and she's living in this city, obviously called Crescent City. And at the start of the first book, one of her close friends dies, and it's very mysterious. There was like a murder involved. And so she gets roped into trying to discover what happened to her friend, and she partners up with this angel who you see here on this cover. His name is Hunt, and he's sort of like a cop detective type character, and so they have to work together to try to figure out what happened. There's a romance obviously that goes on between them. This book, so much sex between them, so if you are looking for Hunt and Bryce to fuck, this is the book for you. I loved how many more POVs were in this. Like we weren't just following Hunt and Bryce, we're also following quite a few other characters, like Therian, who is kind of like a mer person, and then also her brother Rune, who is a fairy. And so I was loving so much of this, but let me just say that I am very, very disappointed with the direction that my girl Sarah Janet Moss took. I don't know if Janet is her middle name, I'm just gonna say that. And for me to like think this much of the book was gonna be 5 stars and then it's now a 3 star, yeah. Unfortunate, very unfortunate. The next book I gave 3 stars is Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This is another book that was so sad. I really wanted to give this 5 stars because the first half of this was flawless, amazing, stunning. Like, I could not get over how much I liked this horror book in the first half. It's about this woman who leads a crew. I don't really know exactly how to explain it, but basically she has a crew and they are in space and they are going around to these like outer areas in space and they like clean things up, and this is actually their last journey together as a crew. And while they're out there, they get these distress signals from a ship that was lost like over 20 years ago, and so they decide to go on board this ship to try to find out what happened to all the passengers. It's kind of like a Titanic situation where this ship was a kind of a cruise liner but in space. I think where this book went wrong was the pacing and how the storytelling switched up halfway through. The first half, they're on this ghost ship and they're trying to figure out what's going on. We're being told the story by the woman who leads the crew like later, like she's telling someone what happened, but we're going back in time. And so basically she's discussing what happened, how they got on this ship, and all this spooky stuff started happening. And I was listening to this audiobook in the dark and I literally wanted to pee my pants. I was so scared. Like, I was like, oh my god, this is crazy, best horror book I've ever read. And then randomly, I don't know why the author did this, halfway through the story we switched perspectives. We are now in present day and we're going back to the ghost ship to where like her crew got left. I don't know, like something about the pacing switch and how we left the other storyline behind really took me out of the story, and I wasn't enjoying it. And it was just a big no for me. So unfortunately this book is gonna get 3 stars. I was so disappointed and sad with the downturn that the pacing and the story took. I ended up not even really liking the resolution. Like, I personally wanted other things to be the reasons behind why all these people died. And so when we finally discover what did happen, I just kind of was like, not feeling it. The next book is another one that I read for that vlog, and that is Luminous Dead. This is another book where the ending, it just didn't stick it. It did not stick it. I did not have a good time by the end of it. I feel like the pacing and the length of the book was just too much. This is another space horror. It's about a woman who is a cave explorer. I feel like there's a word for this, like spelunking, is that a word? I don't know. She goes down into caves and she explores them. And so in this kind of futuristic setting, you put on these bodysuits that basically give you all your needs as you're going on these expeditions. So it has food in there, and then you have a handler that talks to you like through your suit. So similar to the other book, I feel like this one lost a lot of steam halfway through. The first part was so scary. Like, I was like, oh my god, what is going on in this cave? Like, what is going on? Are they being haunted? Is there creatures in here? Like, what is going on? And unfortunately at the second part we just started backtracking a lot in the cave, and so we ended up with a lot of repetitive scenes. And so I feel like it was very cyclical. Like, it was like one moment she trusts her handler, the next moment she doesn't, and then it's like back and forth between her and the handler. The only thing I did like is that her and the handler have like kind of like a random sapphic romance, which is kind of fun, but I don't know. Other than that, I didn't like the ending. I didn't really like the explanation. I didn't really like where the story went after that. It just kind of took me out of it halfway through just because it just started getting really repetitive. And so yeah, unfortunately 3 stars. Again, it was another one that was a big bummer. And then up next we have episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. This is a book that I read for the vlog where I couldn't stop reading till I found 5 stars, and I really wanted this to be the one. Like, I really thought in my heart it could be, because it is a mixed media horror book and everything about it is such a cool idea. And again, the first half of it, amazing, flawless. And it wasn't until we got to like the last quarter that I was like, what is going on here? This book is about a group of ghost hunters who have a television show, and so they are going to this abandoned house that was the site of these scientists in, I believe, the 60s or 70s, and they were there doing these weird experiments on people and doing all this research, and one day they all went missing. And so it said that this house is haunted, and so they are taking their film crew there and trying to film an episode for their TV show. And so we have kind of a wide cast of characters, and the way the story is told, like I mentioned, is mixed media. So we have interviews, we have articles, articles, we have kind of descriptions of what happens in this episode as it's being filmed, and it's kind of all brought together sort of found footage style. And so I really loved the audiobook for this. It is so great. It has a full cast of narrators and it has a lot of sound effects and music and different things. And so if you like that sort of thing, I definitely would recommend this audiobook to you. It isn't a bad book by any means. I just unfortunately fell off a bit towards the end, and I didn't really love the explanation of the ghost or like what was going on in this house. Again, the first half of this was so flawless, amazing. Like I was having so much fun and I was so scared, and then there just is this part where they go down into a well, and then the rest of the book is just a little bit unhinged and crazy. And so I didn't really like how this book ended, but I would be interested in seeing a movie version of this book. Like if someone wanted to make this into a TV show or a film, I definitely would, you know, give it a watch. But ultimately, again, falling flat and becoming a 3-star. So unfortunate. Next we have Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This was actually my first R.F. Kuang book, and I just thought it was fine. It was not my favorite book in the world. I definitely don't like this as much as everyone else. This book is about a white author named Juniper, and she is not doing very well professionally. Her books just really haven't been selling, but she's very close friends with this very successful Asian author named Athena Liu. And at the very start of the novel, they're hanging out in Athena's apartment, and Athena is sharing a manuscript with her that she's been working on that she just finished. And they are eating pancakes, and Athena unfortunately chokes and dies on one of these pancakes. So Juniper decides to steal her manuscript and rewrite a lot of it and publish it as her own book. But it's very interesting because, like I mentioned, Juniper is a white author, and this story is a historical fiction about Chinese soldiers during World War I. And so a lot of people are curious about why this white author would write this story. And so it's kind of like if you took book Twitter and made it into a satire novel. That's what this is. You obviously are not rooting for Juniper throughout this book because she's very unhinged, but not in a fun way. Like not in a way where you're like, yes, get a girl, like lie, like we love that. It's more like you're being a little bit racist, and it's unfortunate. Like in her perspective, she doesn't even realize like how much she has lied to herself to feel like it's okay that she's done this and like stolen this manuscript. I just had like a meltdown in my brain. If you like satire, you might like this. Satire for me is very hit or miss. I wouldn't dissuade anyone from reading this, but I felt like the first half of this was so much better than the second half. I know that I keep saying that for every single one of these 3-star books, but I am an ending bitch. Like if you don't land the ending, I'm not going to like the book. Like there's something about the second half of a novel that if it doesn't continue to keep me interested, it doesn't matter how good the first half was, I will not be giving it a high rating. And then the last book that I gave 3 stars was The Vessel by Adam Neville. This is about a woman that works as a caregiver, and she's assigned this job where she goes into this house of this woman who has dementia. And when she gets there, the woman is just kind of like unwell, creepy vibes. Like she spits on our main character and she attacks her, and she's just kind of like creepy possessed old lady. And one night she has to work the overnight shift, and she brings her daughter, and the old woman's personality completely shifts, and she is very, you know, friendly towards the daughter. And it's just sort of you trying to figure out what's going on with this old lady, and there's a lot of like weird creepy stuff that happens. It felt a lot like a combination between Hereditary and Midsommar. So if you are a fan of those Ari Aster movies, I definitely think that you might like this. The only reason that I gave this book 3 stars instead of 4 stars is because I felt like the pacing was a little bit off for the length. Because it was a novella and it was so short, we didn't really have a lot of time with these characters, and I feel like Adam Neville spent a very long time explaining the backstory of our main character and kind of her financial situation and where she is, how she is, and why she needs this job and blah blah blah. And although I liked that because it added to the story and it made the characters feel very real, I feel like we just didn't spend enough time on the creepy stuff. Like I wanted more of the lady being like just creepy as fuck. And so yeah, I really liked the ending of this. It had kind of like a folk magic horror vibe, and it was kind of witchy, and I really liked that. So yeah, it was good. Moving on to the 2-star section, we have quite a few books that I gave 2 stars, which is unfortunate for me. First of these is Nothing But Blackened Teeth. This is a book that I read for my video where I was reading Goodreads worst books. I found a list on Goodreads where people had put a bunch of books that are like the most lowly rated, and so I went through and looked for the ones with the most reviews and the most people that disliked it and blah blah blah. I don't know, it was like a statistical thing that I was trying to do. So I read this one, and I kind of see why people didn't like it. It's bad. I don't know why so many people have read this, because I feel like everyone I see has said they don't like it, But here I am. I also read it and it was bad. It was bad. I definitely understand why everyone gave this a low rating. This is about a group of friends who is going to this old haunted house, I believe in Japan, and they are attending a wedding there, and there's a ghost with blackened teeth and everybody just starts dying. I don't really know how you could fuck up this story so bad with it being so short, but the author really did. The biggest issue with this book is the prose. It is the purplest prose you will ever find in your life. It is extremely flowery. The story is told in first person, but the descriptions are so endless. It was difficult to read. Also, everyone in the story is extremely unlikable, which is not uncommon for horror, but it was to a point where I was like, I can't root for literally anyone in this. I don't care if you live or die. I hope the ghost gets all of you. It was definitely giving SAT words. Like, the author really wanted us to know how good their vocabulary was. Like, overall, it wasn't my vibe, and it was too much. It was too much, too over the top, to the point where it was distracting and it kept taking me out of the story. At one point, the word medulla oblongata is used, and I've never thought about that part of the brain being used in a horror novel, but something about it, I can't even remember what the sentence was, but it was something about the medulla oblongata being scared or something, and I was like, what? Next up, we have Lost by Gregory Maguire. This is another book for that Goodreads worst video, and this one was a weird read because it's kind of pitched as being like a ghost story, but then once you read it, it's not really a ghost, but it's kind of a ghost story. It's weird. It's a really weird book. Our main character is a woman who is going to London to visit her step cousin, and when she gets there, she can't find him, and so the whole book is her trying to find him, and she's a little bit of an unreliable narrator. Like, as we're kind of figuring out her relationship to her step cousin and her family and like her past, we discover that she's hiding secrets. And then, like I said, it's kind of a haunted house because there's these men that are doing construction on her step cousin's flat, and there's like kind of like a ghost in the wall. I don't know. It's kind of a hard book to explain. It's just a weird book, and the pacing is kind of all over the place. And I think a lot of people read it because Gregory Maguire wrote it, but it's definitely by far his lowest rated book. Up next in the 2-star category, we have Assassin's Apprentice. I am so sorry to everyone that loves Robin Hobb. I know that this is a darling book for many fantasy readers. I unfortunately thought this was so boring. I don't always love fantasy that spans the entire life of someone, and so this book starts when our main character Fitz is very small. He is, I think, like less than 10 years old, and he shows up on the king's doorstep because he is his bastard son, and so he gets raised as being the bastard son of this king, but he like never really gets to meet his dad, and so it's all about how no one really respects him, and as he's getting older, he gets trained up to be an assassin. And I wanted so much more from this because it's literally called The Assassin's Apprentice, and so I wanted more assassination, but because it's his whole life, it just takes a really long time to get to the point, and the most exciting stuff that happens in the book isn't until like the last few chapters. And so if you enjoy a book where you really grow up with someone and see their character grow over time, I think that you might like this book. From what I hear, the rest of the series is similar to this, where you're just really following Fitz throughout his life, but for me, it was so boring. It was so boring. The biggest sin a book can commit is be boring, and I struggled to read this. I read it for my TBR takeover where Elias chose what I read because this is one of his favorite series of all time. He could not stand that I slandered this book, but it just wasn't for me. And I do understand that the length makes sense for how much you're following his life, but I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I didn't really like the world building. I'm also not always into like kings and queens vibe for fantasy. I definitely like high fantasy that's more unique and different, and so because it kind of just followed those regular old tropes, I don't know, it just wasn't for me, and it was long, and I don't really care for Fitz. Then we have Alice by Christina Henry. This was another book that I read for that TBR takeover with a stranger, and unfortunately, obviously I gave this book 2 stars, so I didn't really like it. This book is classified as horror, but I don't really know why. Like, it definitely has some spooky elements, but it's more of like a fantasy, grungy Victorian retelling of Alice in Wonderland. It starts out with Alice being in a mental hospital because after she came back from Wonderland, which in this world is more of like a gritty underworld, like she was like taken by this guy who's considered the White Rabbit, and so after she is released, her family puts her into this hospital, and so she's been there for like many years, and her neighbor, like in the neighboring cell, is this guy that I don't remember his name, but he's supposed to be like the Mad Hatter. And so there is a fire at the beginning of the book, and they escape, and the Jabberwock is kind of running loose throughout the city, so they have to go find him, and there's like a magical sword or something. I don't know. I thought this book was kind of boring, and I didn't find it to be particularly scary. Like, I thought it was going to be more horror because it's labeled that way, but it's definitely more just kind of like a gritty, seedy retelling of Alice in Wonderland. I don't know. It just wasn't for me. Next up, we have Daphne by Josh Malerman. Josh Malerman, I feel, is a hit or miss for me. I have really only liked Bird Box by him, and I didn't really like this one all too much, so kind of a fail on his part. But this is about a girls basketball team, and they are being haunted by an urban legend named Daphne. They have a sleepover and they tell the story of Daphne, and their town has gone to great lengths to sort of cover up this story, and so if anyone talks about her, she'll come and haunt you and start killing everyone. It's kind of like a Bloody Mary situation. And so our main character, like the main girl that we're following, she's a teenager on this basketball team. She has incredible anxiety, and so I feel like this book is an allegory for her anxiety as the story goes on, and I just didn't really like the lore of like how the ghost worked in this, and I didn't find it very suspenseful because even though we're following the one girl, every time someone is visited by the ghost of Daphne, we get to see the scene on page. And so similar to like what I was saying earlier about having too many perspectives in like a horror or thriller that I don't like, I feel like it kind of felt like that, where there wasn't really a lot of suspense because the whole time I knew that the ghost was real and like killing people. The next book may be the biggest disappointment of all time, and it's very, very sad to me, and that is Happy Place by Emily Henry. I originally gave this 3 stars. Like, I think my Goodreads rating might be 3 stars, but I have reflected on this for a while, and unfortunately I do think that this is a 2-star book, which is so sad. I'm not against giving this book a second chance to see if it could be better on a reread, but this book is Emily Henry's worst book. I don't understand how so many people have been giving this 5 stars. Like, I've seen numerous booktubers and reviewers on Goodreads just constantly like, oh my god, this book is amazing, 5 stars. And I'm like, did we read the same Emily Henry book? I don't know. This is a second chance romance about a couple that has been together for almost a decade. And so at the very start of the book, they have broken up, but they haven't told their group of friends because they're from a very close-knit friend group that always goes to the beach every summer together. And so they don't really want to ruin their vacation. Harriet is our main character, and she is in her residency to become a doctor. And she and Wynn were having a long-distance relationship because he had to move home to take care of his mom who had cancer. And so they just had a lot of miscommunication issues, and so they broke up and they didn't want to tell anyone. And so the whole book is just like they have to pretend they're still dating because the friend group doesn't know that they're not together. And I think where this book did not succeed for me is in building up why I should care about this relationship. People We Meet on Vacation is my favorite Emily Henry book, and that is about 2 people who've been friends for over a decade. And so because the format of that story is that we're going between all the different vacations they've gone on together, I feel like we have very concrete chapters of memories and things that happen on page for us to understand why we should care about Alex and Poppy. But with Wynn and Harriet, we didn't have a similar setup, so it was a lot of just like random all over the place stuff. It'd be like, oh my god, in college this happened, and then 5 years ago this happened, and one time we lived in New York together and this happened. And so it was just kind of like not enough for me. Like, I feel like there were so many things that were just summarized and weren't happening on the page, so it was very frustrating to me, especially because we are dealing with a big friend group, and I love friendship in books. Friendship to me is honestly even better than romance, so I was really excited to be reading about all these different friends and stuff. But I feel like we didn't really get to know the characters well enough. Like, the 2 girls who were supposed to be Harriet's like OG best friends, like the people who actually started the friend group, they only get like a couple of scenes at the beginning of the book of them becoming friends, and then after that we just have to assume that they're close. And so anytime it says like, oh, one time this happened at college, it's kind of just like mentioned randomly, and then even when we do get scenes, it's just like a random 1-page scene. And so it's just like we're not really taken in to the friend group the way that I wanted it to. And I don't know, like it didn't have the same charm that Emily Henry normally has, and you would think like second chance romance with fake dating would totally be up my alley. But I think that the way that Emily Henry chose to tell the story just really fell flat for me. Like, I did not care about these people. I also kind of thought Harriet was annoying. Like, she was just like, well, I don't want to be a doctor, blah. And I was like, okay girl, you just like don't be a fucking doctor, like what the fuck. And when you find out all the stuff that her and Wynn weren't communicating about, I'm like, how the fuck are you gonna date for almost a decade and never tell each other your real feelings? Like, what? Up next we have One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose. It's about a group of really wealthy women who live in Buckhead, Georgia, which is kind of funny because I live in the Atlanta area and Buckhead is probably like 20 minutes from my house. And so I've been to Buckhead numerous times. I don't really love reading books that take place where I live because there's something about it that just like takes me to the story. I also feel like Geneva Rose really overused the word Buckhead. Like she just said Buckhead, 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 like every other word. Like if I had an ebook copy of this, I would do a search to find out how many times she said it because it was no less than 200 times. But anyway, these rich ladies live in Buckhead and they are a part of this salon that's very prestigious, and you have to be a member there to get your hair done and get tanning and whatever they offer there. And so there's just a bunch of petty drama that goes on between them. And so at the start of the novel, we are told that one of them is dead, hence the title of the book, and the person who's telling us what happened is Jenny, the hairdresser that works at the salon who owns it. And so she's talking to a detective, like telling him all the events that led up to this situation. And so where this book kind of fell flat is, number one, the writing isn't great in my opinion, and then number two, the storytelling was just very much giving Real Housewives of Atlanta with a random murder at the end. Like the death and the actual mystery of like what happened does not happen till like the very end of the book, and it kind of happens off page. We just get a summary of what went on. And so most of this book is just the drama between these women, and I don't really care about this sort of thing. I also don't love domestic dramas, and I feel like it was kind of like a mix between like catty old ladies in their like 30s and 40s and then domestic stuff because they're like all married and there's like cheating and weird stuff going on. And so I don't know, it just kind of was like blah to me. Like I don't even really like want to waste more time on it. It was just like kind of a whatever book, so I gave it 2 stars. Then we have The Whispers by Ashley Audrain. This is another author that I was giving a second chance. I really did not enjoy Ashley Audrain's first book, The Push. I know everyone else loves that book. Like people are shocked when I say that I gave that book 1 star. I did not like it, and I'm so sorry if that was like one of your favorite books that you've read in recent times, but The Push was just not it for me. So I thought, you know, Ashley Audrain is coming out with her second book, let me give it a shot, and I did, and unfortunately I still did not like it. The Whispers, in my opinion, is not really a thriller, so if anyone tries to claim it's a thriller, please don't listen to them. I feel like The Push is definitely more of like a psychological thriller drama than this is. So this is basically about a group of mothers who live in this really nice neighborhood, and at the start of the book they're like at a birthday party, and one of them lashes out at her son who has behavioral problems, and everybody is kind of shocked by her like angry energy towards her son. And then like I think it's like 6 months later he falls out of a window in their house, and so people are unsure if she like pushed him or did something. But we just have so many POVs in this that I feel like it really took any sort of suspense there could have been out of it. Like I think we're following 4 perspectives, so we're getting to see every angle of the story from 4 people, but I don't really feel like it added anything, because if anything it just spoiled stuff for me. Like I always guessed what was going to happen in the next perspective because someone would say something or they knew part of the story and then someone else knew the other part, and so it just was whatever. I also just don't enjoy stories about motherhood. Like I do not want to be a mother. I don't really like children. If you are a mother, I love that for you. You're so brave, you're so strong. But I don't like motherhood. I don't want to read about it. And I have heard from a lot of moms that they also don't want to read about motherhood because they literally live it every day. And I feel like that is just the topic that Ashley Audrain wants to write about. She is fixated on being a mom. The last book that I gave 2 stars was Shadow of the Gods. I read this very recently for my TBR takeover with Jordaline. I am so sorry to Jordaline, but that video did not go according to plan. I didn't really like any of the books that she had me read, which is unfortunate. But Shadow of the Gods is a Nordic high fantasy. It's a little bit hard to explain because I had to start it no less than 4 times. My brain was not latching onto this plot. It was very difficult for me to really get into this. Like I mentioned, in a Nordic setting, and many years ago the gods had like a war, and after they are gone, like the gods are considered to be like dead, I think. And so now that they're gone, there's all these like creatures that roam the land, and we're following 3 different protagonists. We have Orca, who is a mother, and her son gets kidnapped at the start of this book, so she is trying to hunt him down. Orca was definitely my favorite character. She was giving MILF energy. She was a badass. She was killing men. I love that. But her perspective could not carry the entire book because I still was bored. Then we have Vogue, and he is someone who used to be a slave, and he recently killed his master and ran away, and so now he is joining this mercenary group called the Bloodsworn, and so it's all about his training, joining that. And then the final character, I can never remember her name. It's something like Elvira, something with an E, I think, or maybe an A, I don't know. But she is part of an army, and so she's like a soldier in this army, and her dad is like a general or something, and so she's trying to prove herself. And so they're all hunting down like the bones of these gods because they have like magic or something. I don't know. I could not really tell you anything else that happens. Do not ask me to explain the politics of this world. If you held a gun to my head and asked me to explain more, I would perish. So I unfortunately didn't like this. I wouldn't say that it's poorly written. I would just say that it's not my type of fantasy. There was just something about the pacing and the storytelling that I was just kind of bored. Like, I don't really know if I'd ever try another book by John Gwynne if his other books are similar. I know that a lot of people love that other like Malice series that he's written, but this one, it was a no for me, and I will not be picking up the sequel, and I'm very sorry to everyone who is a John Gwynne stan. Okay, we are coming up on the final category, the 1-star reads, all the books that I truly despised in the last 3 months. First of these is The Finkler Question, which is another book that I read for reading the worst books on Goodreads. This is a very weird book that I don't really understand. It actually won the Man Booker Prize in 2010, and now I'm convinced that the Man Booker Prize is a sham because this book was so bad. It's about this guy who is very obsessed with Jewish people. I know that's very weird to say, but at the start of the novel, he gets mugged and he thinks his mugger calls him a Jew, and so the rest of the novel is him being convinced he has some sort of connection to being Jewish because he, I don't know, like thinks someone mistook him for being Jewish. Also, 2 of his best friends are Jewish. One of them is this man that has the last name Finkler. I think his name is Sam Finkler. And then this other like older gentleman that is also Jewish. And so the reason that all 3 of them are close is because they often meet with one another, because the 2 Jewish characters, their wives recently passed away, and so they are widows and they have that in common. And then they've been like longtime friends with the main character that I can't remember his name. And so he is just like obsessed with Jewish people. Like, that's all I can really say about this book. Like, he just really, something about the Jewish culture he's really into, because the entire time he is just like on this like road of discovery trying to figure out like how he could become Jewish, which is weird because he doesn't ever actually convert. At one point in the story, he actually dates a relative of the older guy, and all he can talk about is how Jewish he is. I know I'm saying the word Jewish so much, but that's kind of how this book felt, like every other word. The reason it's called The Finkler Question is because he is always referencing his friend Finkler, and like he kind of calls other Jewish people Finklers as well, which is really weird. The author is Jewish, so I guess he was allowed to write the story, but it was just a really weird book about a Gentile man who just really wanted to be Jewish. Then we have One Night at the Call Center, which is another book that I read for reading the worst books on Goodreads, and this one was very, very bad. I had to physically read it because there is no audiobook. It's originally a book that is from India. This book is genuinely just following people on a work shift. Like, every chapter is named after what hour it is, and so it really drags on. Like, if you thought working your own 8-hour shift dragged on, imagine reading one for these people. Also, the end of this book, it gets really weirdly speculative. Like, there's one point where they like talk to God. It's a weird book, and I don't really understand why it is as popular as it is. It definitely has quite a few people who don't like it. I have heard from some people from India that this author is very like famous for being like an Indian author, and so he's very like popular in like literature there, and so I don't know if that's why so many people have read it. There's also a movie adaptation, and I believe the IMDb rating for it is like 3 stars. So nobody likes this book or movie. Next up, we have The Husbands. I don't remember the name of this author, Chandler Baker, something like that. I read this randomly of my own accord, not for a vlog, because I heard another booktuber talking about it and they said they really liked it and it reminded them of Stepford Wives. And I love stories that kind of follow that pattern of storytelling where, you know, there's all these people that know some secret thing is going on and there's one character who's trying to figure it out. And so our main character is a lawyer and she's pregnant, and she is looking for a new house with her husband, and her husband is one of those like loser husbands that uses weaponized incompetence to not be the best partner he could be. And so he was a very annoying character, but our main character finds this sort of gated community, and when she gets there, all the husbands there act very perfect and they take care of their wives, and their wives are all very like high powered, like successful women, and with her being a lawyer and trying to make partner at her firm, she just feels like a kinship with these women, and so she really wants to live here. But it just wasn't very suspenseful, and I didn't really like the main character, which I felt really bad about because I feel like this whole book was supposed to be some sort of like commentary or like feminist thing, but the main character was very insufferable and her husband was just such a loser. And I feel like every other page she kept defending her husband but then also shit talking him, and she just like couldn't make up her mind about what she thought about her own husband. And the ending of this was just kind of stupid, and overall I just felt like it was kind of a waste of my time. The next book is very unfortunate because I read it during that video when I couldn't stop reading waiting until I got a 5-star read, and I don't know why I even picked it up because the premise itself is not my thing and I'm really not into cheating. This is about these two authors that have a long history. They used to write books together, but they never dated because the guy character was actually married the entire time that they were writing partners. But the weird thing is that they write romance books with one another. So they would like write these like smutty ass like romance books that kind of had like a Sally Rooney vibe, and the whole time he had a full ass wife. So it was just really weird because they go into this writing relationship with him already having been in a relationship, and so we're flashing between what happened when they used to write books together and now when they're having to write a book together again. I guess I didn't mention that, but basically their publishing house is like calling in the favor and they're like, hey, you guys were supposed to write another book for us, like you had like a 3-book contract, and so they now have to finish out that contract, and for various reasons between the two of them they decide that they do want to write this. And now the guy is divorced, so there's more of like an opportunity for them to strike up a real romance. This book was a real issue for me because I don't love cheating as a plot point, so I don't even know why I picked this up because I knew that it had cheating vibes, but someone said that it reminded them of an Emily Henry book, and I was like, sign me up, I love Emily Henry. And it was a real downer. I don't even really want to rant about it any longer. If you want to see a full like 10-minute rant about how much I hated this book and different aspects of like why I hated it and different scenes and whatever, then I suggest you go and watch that vlog. I will link it down below. But it was a very unfortunate book for me to read in a video where I was trying to get a 5-star read. The next 3 books are from a vlog that I did recently for this series I've been doing on my channel where I read subgenres of romance. Something you gotta know about me is I'm a little vanilla with what I like in romance, and so I've been exploring what the romance genre has to offer. And so recently I read taboo romance, which is basically romance that is about taboo things. It's literally what it says. It's kind of dark romance where it's going to involve subjects that are not normally above board. And so I don't really want to talk about these books in great length because I already did that in this vlog that recently popped off, randomly got like over 200,000 views. So if you want to watch it, I will link it down below. I go through the entire plots of all 3 of these books, but I obviously gave all 3 of them 1 star because I really did not enjoy them. A lot of them had to deal with like manipulation and non-consent. There was incest involved. The first one I read was Credence by Penelope Douglas. This book is about a girl whose parents recently died, and so she goes to live with her estranged step-uncle and her step-cousins, and she ends up having a reverse harem with them, and the uncle is like in his 40s and she's only like 18 years old, so she's very barely legal, and there's just like weird energy and a lot of non-consensual scenes that happen. And I cannot believe how many people love this book. Like, it's shocking to me. It has over like 50,000 5-star reviews, and I sincerely want to know if everyone has a therapist. And then the next book that I read was Dark Notes by Pam Godwin. This is a student-teacher relationship that has BDSM involved. Our main character, Ivory, is a piano player. She goes to this really prestigious private school for people who are in the arts, and so she's trying to get into this conservatory when she graduates, and she has a new piano teacher who honestly takes advantage of her, and they start a relationship. And he is 10 years older than her. He's like 27 and she's 17, so she is actually underage. This book definitely made Ezra and Arya look kind of angelic from Pretty Little Liars. Like, if you thought that that relationship was problematic, you could read this book, and it is way worse. And I am also kind of shocked by how many people like this book, because this one is actually illegal. Like, genuinely, like, there are parts of the book where the teacher is worried that he's gonna get caught by the police because he's dating an underage girl, and it's kind of just like How to Catch a Predator in book form. And then the last book I read was probably the most taboo of all, and it was called The Wild. It is a father-daughter romance, like actual incest going on in this one. They are a family that moves to Alaska, and they get into an accident and the mother passes away, and so the daughter and the father are stranded alone in the middle of nowhere, and so they have to make a life for themselves, and they build a cabin, and they end up starting a romance with each other. And the girl is, I believe, 16, 17, and the dad is in his 40s. So another one that is illegal on many levels. And obviously I did not like this. The writing was not good at all. I will say that for all 3 of these books, the writing was just like abysmal. I feel like if you're gonna get me to be on board with taboo romance, you need to make the writing like really engaging and interesting. But unfortunately, all of these had very bad writing, so I gave all 3 of these books 1 star. If you, again, want to hear my long, ranty thoughts of the description of the entire plot of these books, you can go over and watch that vlog. People have been really enjoying that video. Obviously, it kind of randomly got a lot of views, so you can watch that if you are interested in hearing me cringe at all the stuff that goes on in those books. The next book is A Simple Plan. This is another book that I unfortunately read for my TBR takeover with Jordan that I didn't enjoy. It's about these three men who find money in the middle of the woods, like when they're like hiking through the woods trying to find their dog, and this abandoned plane is like full of like millions of dollars, and so they take the money, and then the entire book it's just these three people trying to figure out what they're going to do with the money, and a lot of like, what would you do if you had $1 million? This book was written in, I believe, like the early 1990s, and so it just kind of felt very dated. It wasn't historical in that like you really learn anything about that time period, but it also wasn't really anything else. Like, I don't even really know what genre this was supposed to be. Like, maybe like crime. It's not much of a thriller, and it's not much of a horror. I thought this book was going to kind of delve into, oh my god, these people are like looking for this money that went missing and they're all gonna get in trouble. But it really just became like the three guys like fighting about what they wanted to do with the money. And the crazy thing is that this book has a lot of wild things that happen. There's one point where everything just goes to shit and it's very unhinged, and you'd think that it would have been interesting to me, but I was just not into it. I don't know, I didn't like it. It was the last vlog that I posted, so if you want to hear more thoughts, you can go watch that. And then the final book that I gave 1 star was actually the last book I read during this quarter, and it was also for my TBR takeover with Jordan. It was Off Season by Jack Ketchum. This is a cannibal story. It's about these people who are living in a cabin on vacation, and these cannibals are like lurking in the woods, and then they kidnap one of them and like eat her in front of everyone, and then the rest of them are just like fighting for their lives all night. And you'd think that it would be like exciting, and I'm not gonna say that the scenes weren't exciting. It was very like they were all running around and people are dying or whatever. I just didn't really like the writing style in this. This book was written in the 80s. It kind of had that campy, misogynistic horror vibe, which is not bad. That's definitely a part of this genre, especially if you're reading something that was written in the 80s. But I didn't really love how the female characters were overly sexualized. And then there was a perspective of the cannibals like throughout the book. And so I felt like, I've mentioned this a couple of times even in this reading wrap up, where I'm just not really enjoying when I'm reading a horror or a thriller and I get a perspective of the bad guy. Like, I feel like it really takes me out of the story. So the pacing on this just wasn't great, and I didn't like the writing style, and I don't know, it was kind of gory for the sake of being gory. It was whatever, I don't know, it just wasn't really my vibe. I didn't really like it, and so I gave it 1 star. If you can't tell, I'm getting a little tired. I have now talked about over 30 books in this, so I feel like as I went on talking about these books, I was getting less and less descriptive. So yeah, but we are now at the end of this video. I'm kind of curious to see in my analytics how long people stayed watching this, because I had the Subway Surfer on the screen. So if you've made it to the end of this video and you enjoyed it, feel free to use the sandwich emoji in your comment. I think that's kind of funny because sandwiches and Subway, like, get it like Subway Surfer, and like Subway is like a sandwich shop, and then you're gonna leave the sandwich in the comment. I don't know, I thought it was a funny thing. And let me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were. Also, did you enjoy this format? Was it funny? Was it quirky? Was it interesting? Or was it just weird? I don't know. I just got it in my head and I wanted to do it, and so I did, and it was random, but I did it. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. You're all beautiful. Have a nice day.